Good evening. I'm Dr. Ilaria Scaglia, and I am Senior Lecturer in Modern History at Aston University. I want to welcome you to this event organized by History, represented by myself and by Dr. Brian Sadler in collaboration with the University Center for Health in Society. We worked with Dr. Alexis Payton in particular. Now, this evening, we would like to share with you some of the findings from a pilot oral history project entitled Hidden Voices, Black Healthcare Workers in the Midlands, and also to allow some time for questions and answers by two of the participants whom we're fortunate to have here with us live. So throughout this session, please feel free to write comments and questions, and we will pick up as many as we can. First, however, I would like to turn it over to the Dean of the Medical School, Dr. Helen Cameron, to say a few words about the significance of this history project from the point of view of our discipline.
Thank you, Ilaria. Good evening. My name is Helen Cameron. I'm Professor and Dean of Medical Education and currently the Interim Head of the Medical School. It really is my pleasure to welcome you all. Many of us will be very well aware of how important the contribution from others, those beyond our own coast, have been, and in particular Black healthcare workers, in developing the NHS, in providing a great service for the NHS, and then more latterly, as British citizens, Black healthcare workers continue to make a major contribution to our NHS. But most of us know very little about the individual and very varied narratives. So I'm really looking forward to this evening's presentation and discussion. These voices are really important since their histories can teach us so much about our own society and about healthcare. And I really welcome this collaboration between history, the University Centre for Health and Society, and of course, the medical school. So I'm looking forward to a really stimulating evening and hope it's the beginning of an ongoing collaboration. And I'd like to hand back to Dr. Scaglia now. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Cameron. Great pleasure has been ours. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sadler, who's also a lecturer in history and the coordinator of other oral history projects here at Aston, to say more about this particular project and how it came about.
Thanks to Dr. Scaglia. So Black healthcare workers in the Midlands is one of many oral history projects that we're doing here in the Aston history section. Our aim is to shed light on stories that shape the lives of literally tens of thousands of individuals across Birmingham and the Midlands, and to involve protagonists in the collection of stories for future researchers. Now, we've also extended the collaborative dimension of this project to give opportunities to our undergraduate history students. And they answered this invitation, in fact, with great enthusiasm. 6 students were involved, either in interviewing or in analysing the recordings that we're going to be sharing with you. And they are, in alphabetical order, Taiba Akil, Chloe Bailey, Anna Finch, Sam Reety-Hans, Owen Powis, and Sophie Sampson. Now, there are 2 wider contexts that are worthwhile underlining before we go any further this evening. Birmingham in the Midlands is a huge centre for healthcare, with some nationally and internationally leading clinics, not least of which is the Children's Hospital just over the road from us at Aston. But notwithstanding the scientific and medical brilliance which sustains these centres, few would deny that their successes are also about the ordinary people, many from BME communities who've often been frontline health workers without necessarily being headline makers. A second context that's crucial here is that of the Midlands, and especially Birmingham and its surroundings. The stories that we've begun to collect are about Black individuals and communities, but also about the post-war movement of people from former British colonies, and also how British cities changed in the latter stages of the 20th century. Our Hidden Voices project, therefore, seeks to amplify voices that have often gone unheard, to add something to the annals of Black British history, to the history of local healthcare, and also to the history of our home city of Birmingham. And all these roads converge, we think, on our doorstep in a most extraordinary way. So we hope that the interviews we share with you this evening are just the beginning of something larger. We invite anyone who is watching or who later watches this recordings to get in contact if they think that they can contribute and perhaps share their story with us, or even to mention this project to others who they think might be interested in contributing. So now I'll hand back to Dr. Scalia to talk about some of our preliminary analysis.
Yeah, so thank you. So in this pilot project, we identified a few common themes. One is that the experience of Black healthcare workers cannot be separated from the experience of Black people in Britain. And this sometimes involved experiencing blatant racism. And so the first clip we're going to play is one of the most poignant of the entire project, and really tries to describe what this meant. This is from Danielle who's the chair of the Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health NHS Foundation Trust, who was interviewed by Dr. Brian Sadler and by its second-year history student Samriti Hans, recalling her childhood in Sheldon, Rednall, and Northfield in South Birmingham, and also reflecting on how she sees some of these trends she experienced in childhood coming back today.
I wouldn't say there's been huge changes, but the experiences that we had as children growing up, which were, windows were smashed frequently, dog's mess put through the letterbox frequently, couldn't plant flowers in the garden without them being pulled up. You could play outside with the kids in the street, but if they went into their gardens, you couldn't go. There were street parties for the royal wedding, things like that we weren't allowed to go to. All of those sorts of things. It was very, very explicit. Explicit and overt graffiti that you would have chalked on your door, on your pathways, those sorts of things. It was in your face.
Now, Taxmani, who's the director of Transformation and Partnership for Black Country, West Birmingham Clinical Commissioning Groups, also recalled his own struggle as he came to Britain from his native Zimbabwe at the age of 18, when I interviewed him together with final year history student Anna Finch. Here is a clip from his interview.
Yeah, so I would say that I was quite naive, actually, having arrived in this country and having grown up in an independent Zimbabwe, which is, that independent bit was really important. The racial issues for me were not as pronounced. I grew up. I grew up in a kind of in an interesting sort of dynamic where all of our neighbours to the right and to the left were white, and behind us, and only the neighbours in front of us were black. So I grew up with an open mind in terms of that aspect. I didn't really see race in that sense. I was aware of it because obviously an emerging nation, a new nation, which was an independent Zimbabwe. I understood the history, but I didn't really have a strong view in terms of the black and white divide. Really, I was quite open-minded, and so coming into this country, I was open-minded, but I quickly started to realize the issues in terms of how the system is actually flawed in actually appreciating that diversity and the power and the richness of diversity, and in the sense that opportunities were very, very few for me to progress in the way that I would have liked to progress.
So another theme that emerged from this project is that the history of Black healthcare workers in the Midlands often cut across generations. And so here is Another clip from Taxmani, this time talking about the experience of his mother, who came to Britain in 1998 and who, even if she had been a fully trained nurse in Zimbabwe, had to adjust to life as an auxiliary nurse.
She struggled to acclimatize. Every time I spoke to her, she was saying to me, in a couple of years, I'm going back to Zimbabwe. In a couple of years, I'll be going back. Every time you talk to her, but she's still here, by the way. But, that for me was, I suppose, the pangs of struggle, struggling to adjust to this society and how this society works, even professionally. So I think she struggled greatly. It's not been my struggle, if I'm honest. I've adjusted to this society much better than she did, but that's because of the kind of benchmark. The starting point was very different. She had this whole history. She came into this country. She was, I think, maybe 40 or thereabouts. Yeah. And
she had a life.
She had a whole life that she'd experienced in Zimbabwe, whereas I hadn't. And so the starting point is very, very different. She struggled massively in terms of adjusting culturally and professionally. The culture and the professional aspect cannot be divorced.
Now, another of our interviewees, Jennifer Jones Rigby, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Health Exchange, a local third sector organization, also stressed the importance of her mother's experience as an auxiliary nurse and the overall impact her family had on her own choice to become involved in social work in the health sector. And so here is a clip from the interview that I conducted with her, together with our second-year student, Taiba Akil, as she answered the question about why she become involved in such a career.
I think there were a couple of things. My dad was a minister, but he was also one of these ministers who also worked as well. So he was a deacon within the church. And my mum was an auxiliary nurse for years and years and years. That's all I knew her as. So they were both caring in different ways. My dad was very caring in a pastoral way, where he would support individuals, and we would always have somebody round for dinner. People who were lonely, didn't have anywhere else to go, so there'd always be extra food made on a Sunday, and there would always be somebody else there, and we would hear their stories. And what I saw from my parents was they were very inclusive, so it didn't really matter what culture people were from. It didn't matter whether they were black or white. We had all sorts. I mean, we had a lady living with us for about 3 years who was not even related to us, but was an old lady who needed a place to live. And so my parents converted a downstairs room, and that became her space. And she lived and slept and ate in there. And I found that really amazing, because her family lived about 5 minutes away from where we lived, but they wouldn't take her in. So without thinking about it, my mum and dad said, "Oh, you come and live here." So I had an example of thinking outside of yourself and taking up this civil responsibility. And I was also interested in politics from quite an early age as well. And both my parents would always say, it's really important that you vote. And they would always walk down to the voting station. And that was a ritual every time there was an election. And I remember thinking, as soon as I can vote, I'm going to walk to, my election point to go and cast my vote. So I had a really great example. And the social policy degree that I did kind of solidified all of that.
Now, there is another quote from this interview a bit later, where Jennifer Jones Rigby recalled her mum again. And she said, so what she, I guess, motivated me by was her work ethic and her love of learning and education, which was always there, phenomenally always there. And so she and other interviewees recalled how their own progress often came because of their own drive to go the extra mile. And so the older generation and their own drive often come back. On the point, though, of going on the extra mile, here is a clip from Daniel
I would say throughout my work, up until possibly joining boards as a non-executive. So up until then, I've always worked at a much higher level than the level I've been paid for. So a lot of the work that I've described to you was way outside of what I was meant to be doing. I just saw the opportunity and went for it and made it happen. And half the time, people didn't even realise until afterwards what I'd achieved, and were very pleased to see it. But if I'd stuck within the narrow confines of my role, I wouldn't have achieved those things. So I would say most of my career, I've done great work, but I haven't really had status or pay that reflects that. So yes, it is a great career, but it depends how you look at it.
Now, similar complexity was also brought out by Taxmani in describing his own emotions and the effect that loneliness had on his own professional development and the overall experience. And here is a clip that illustrates this dynamic.
I just wanted to know if, like, your experiences of isolation, of loneliness, obviously it has a big effect on your mental health, and I just wondered how you feel that these feelings of being lonely, feeling by yourself, did it affect sort of your progression in your career? Did it make you feel, can't think of the right word, but did it sort of spur you on to progress up to obviously the role that you're in now, or do you feel that it had an effect on you at work?
Yeah. So that's a really good question and an important one. So having been almost transplanted into a different society and culture, I did experience that culture shock, even though I didn't have much of an history, if you like, in terms of Zimbabwe and working there. I had a lot of history in terms of growing up there. Yeah, I found it really lonely. Like I said, friendships and things were an issue. It was a problem for me. But I focused on my work and I focused on what I've got to do for myself, and how I can make a meaningful contribution to community and society. I also had this kind of, I suppose, desire to make a difference, a strong desire to make a difference. I felt like I could make a difference. I don't know what it was, whether I was born with it or what, I don't know. But I always felt like I was going to make a difference in life. And so that spurred me on. That determination to make a difference spurred me on. I felt lonely, but my desire to make a difference was much more stronger than my loneliness, I guess. But I also have the faith as well. My faith in God, in Christ Jesus. It spurred me on, gave me a lot of strength and resilience, finding community, if you like, within Christianity. It helped me greatly as well. And again, just my studies, and focusing on my studies and bettering myself in that sense also was a channel for all of the kind of vicissitudes, if you like, that I was experiencing at the time. So yes, it did encourage me. It did spur me on in terms of my career progression. I always wanted to make a difference, and I still want to make a difference.
Now, one of the privileges of being historians or students in history is that we get to hear such testimonies in their entirety. It was very, very hard to select clips among so many poignant moments. And I do want to share one, just one more from Jennifer Jones Rigby on what she sees as missing from main historical narratives, which voices she still sees as remaining hidden, so to speak, before we begin then the question and answer session part of the event and ask him directly for more. So here's the last clip.
Yeah, I think for me, there are people who I think of as heroes, who are those who are on the front line of health and social care services, and particularly in hospitals. I think of people like my mum. She was an auxiliary nurse. They didn't command the high wages, but they held these hospitals together. They were the ones who were cleaning and doing all sorts of supporting the new nurses coming in, the new student nurses. They worked really, really hard to support the NHS over many years. These auxiliary nurses, the porters, you know, the people who are not necessarily considered in high-level posts within health, their voices need to be heard because they have contributed so much to the NHS and to social care that I think their voices are often not heard. And I think that's something that's missing.
So as I said at the beginning, this is only a pilot project, and the broader goal really is to reach out to these people. And we can only be so grateful to the very first set of volunteers who stepped forward to tell their story. And we do have two participants to the pilot project with us tonight. And these are Jennifer and Taps. If I may use your first name now, I feel like by now we know you a bit. So thank you so much for joining us. They should be appearing on screen momentarily. And it's just such a joy to have you. And I really want to just begin by asking you, is there anything that you would like to say after seeing the clips from the other interviewees and from seeing yourself now within this context and how we frame them? You know? So, and if Jennifer, maybe you want to start. And then...
Yeah, I think it must have been incredibly hard to try and pick the clips out of that whole time we were together in the interview. And I really would encourage anybody who is online or watching to watch the whole thing if they can, because there's a lot of information contained in those clips, and absolutely right. I'm just really glad to be part of this, because there are lots of hidden voices, including my mother, and I've just learned tonight that Tap's mother was also an auxiliary nurse, and these roles were fundamental and still are. That level of role is fundamental within the NHS, and so yeah, it's so many things that we could have pulled from the clips. I think it's captured, what you shared has captured an essence of that, and it'd be really good for people to see the rest of us as well.
I would absolutely concur with that. And for me, I suppose the one thing I would like to reinforce maybe is about the importance of appreciating the impact of culture and the convergence of cultures in our society. So where we've got people coming from different backgrounds, etc., we tend to be quite defensive about that and almost apprehensive about that. But actually, it's a fantastic opportunity where cultures converge, because where cultures converge, what we then have is an exchange of values. And an exchange of values actually makes us richer as a society. You know, so I think if anything, we should be celebrating that convergence of cultures. And I think if there's anything that I would like to take away myself as a call to action, is to embrace multiculturalism and the convergence of different cultures, and actually being open to actually listening and understanding the background of a person, their culture, those values that they bring to our society. Because ultimately, I think it is that convergence of cultures and that diversity and the richness of value exchange, if you like, that really, really nourishes our society in really profound ways. So, I think also the whole notion of culture is an important one, because you can't divorce culture from professional experience.
So when we go and we're working in our hospitals or in our offices, wherever that might be, in a clinic, you know, when we are exercising our professional a role or carrying out our professional role, it is really about enforcing that culture. That culture lingers on with us, irregardless of where we are. So I think it's really important that we take stock of the importance of culture, the convergence of different cultures, and how that adds value to our society.
Yes, and speaking on the convergence of culture, I do hope that this event in the online platform is going to help us in that respect. And so, speaking of which, I do just want to mention very briefly a couple of people that helped us to put this together. One is Sam Cook, who's producing the show right now, and you've seen the crawl is showing you how you can submit questions and comments. Please do so as we speak. We had Jean Locke, who helped us to set up the Eventbrite form and to collect questions beforehand. In a moment, Dr. Sadler will ask one of the questions that were pre-submitted. And then we had Dr. Céline Benoit, who helped through the great means offered by the internet to get the word out and to get participants that are here to answer, to participate and to be interviewed. And Lucy Drake, who helped us to then, from a technical standpoint, to cut down these clips. I just wanted to acknowledge how we often berate technology because of many headaches, but in this case, it does help us to come together with the convergence of culture. So Dr. Sadler is now going to ask a question among the ones who were pre-submitted.
I want to come to a question that was actually put forward by Professor Cameron, who started off our broadcast this evening. And she said in her question that she'd be interested to hear about the experiences of those who came to the UK a little bit earlier, in the maybe in the 50s and 60s. Now, your own careers, Jennifer and Tat, began much later than that. But just to take Professor Cameron's question in a slightly different direction, I wonder if you recall, perhaps early on in your careers, working alongside or meeting Black healthcare workers who had been part of those original waves, or maybe second generation waves. Whether you recall, the stories that they told you, or what they might have shared with you about their own experiences.
Absolutely. Well, one of the clips that you heard was about my mother. She's one of those people who came over in the 50s, an auxiliary nurse, worked within the hospital at Heartlands, which is now Heartlands, until she retired early to care for my father. And her experiences are not dissimilar to many nurses who were called to come over to the country, similar to the Windrush individuals who were called to come and help out post the Second World War. And for her, coming over to England was, this is a place of prosperity. It's a place where, almost the streets are paved with gold, and it's the mother country is a term used quite a lot in the Caribbean. And for her, what she found as an auxiliary nurse and she actually wasn't one of the ones who was a state registered nurse or who had actually had the qualifications back in the Caribbean, and they did the same exams. She actually had trained as an auxiliary nurse, but many came over and were told to go and become auxiliary nurses because their qualifications that they had was not being recognized. And that was absolutely unacceptable, but that's what she experienced in terms of her peers. Now, the other thing that she experienced, and I'm sure Taps would share this as well, is often when trying to provide care to a number of patients, some of the responses would be, I don't want a Black nurse. I don't want Black hands touching me. I don't want a Black person to be administering care. Now, these were people in desperate situations that actually really didn't have very much choice, but still felt able to voice that they didn't want a specific person based on the color of their skin alone. And that's something that I know still today that a number of people who are within the healthcare sector are still dealing with. It might be less overt, but it's still definitely there. So that's something that I recall. I'm sure, Taps, you probably have a similar story.
Actually, you're saying about the qualifications not being recognized. My mother came in 1998 and her qualifications were still not being recognized. And I think there's new recruits coming in from Africa and other places in Asia now whose qualifications are still not being recognized. So we've got these systemic kind of hindrances and issues or barriers, if you like, in terms of accepting and trusting the educational processes within other countries. So Zimbabwe was, as I mentioned in my interview, just having received independence from Britain in 1980. It still had those educational systems that were very much similar to here. Well, exactly the same. I wrote Cambridge exams when I set my exams for GCSE, O levels and A levels. I wrote Cambridge curriculum. But still, when you come into this country, you almost have to start all over again, even though the system and the process is exactly the same. My mother came in 1998, a highly experienced nurse. She was a midwife. She was trained in midwifery, trained in mental health nursing, trained in general adult nursing. She did the whole thing. She was actually a trainer of nurses by the time she left Zimbabwe. She was a very, very experienced matron. When she came into this country, she had to do what they call adaptation. And as she was doing adaptation, she was working as a healthcare assistant. So she went all the way down from being a matron and training nurses to being a care worker in effect. Someone at the time who didn't really have any qualifications in caring. So you can imagine how demeaning that can be for someone who has worked extremely hard to get all those qualifications under their belt. And so we're talking about Windrush experiences, but those Windrush experiences are still very present. They're very present now. Our system is still flawed now in terms of recognizing those qualifications from other countries. But it all goes back again to that issue. Sorry for bringing this up again. That issue of culture. The reason why, for example, my mother struggled to acclimatize in this country was because no one valued her culture. In the same way that people are failing, or the system is failing to value professional qualifications, there's an abject failure to value the culture of other people that are coming into this country. So, and that's why I said earlier that we need to, as a society, listen and take stock of the cultures that are coming into our country, because they're only edifying what we already have. It's not taking away or seeping away from what we have. It's actually building and enhancing what we have, because there's an exchange of values and value exchanges taking place. So that culture piece is a very important one, taking stock of people who are coming in, what they're actually bringing, the expertise that they have, and actually appreciating that. And that goes the same for the kind of professional experience that people bring in, because there's a convergence of culture and professional expertise as well. You can't divorce the culture from the professional experience or expertise.
Dr. Sadler, you had another question, right, from the pre-submitted one that.
Yes, just one more, I think, from the pre-submitted questions for now, and this came from Alice Jarvis. Hopefully, she's following the broadcast. She was asking whether you see differences in diversity between physical and mental health care. I guess what she means there is perhaps different stories or different levels of engagement of Black healthcare workers, either on the physical side or on the mental health care side.
I'll speak on the mental health side, actually, specifically. Post-graduating, fresh out of my social policy degree, I was ready to change the world. And one of the posts that came up was actually a post in Yorkshire. Now, I'd been studying down in Brighton for 4 years, headed up to Yorkshire to take on this role as a primary care advocate in mental health services. And it was actually for a Black mental health organisation called SACMA, Sheffield African Caribbean Mental Health Association. And it still is going today. And I bring that example up because in 1997, I started my role as an advocate. And that was working with psychiatrists and GPs, supporting patients at ward rounds, those who were African Caribbean. And that was in 1997. And all of these years later, unfortunately, not very many things have changed. So we still have overrepresentation of young Black men within mental health services. They are still more likely to be on locked wards. They are still much more likely to be taken under a section that isn't voluntary. We still have a lack of cultural understanding with regards to their needs once they are in either a locked wards or in a facility. So in terms of mental health services, the fact that we still need to have these organisations like SACMA and many others up and down the country to try and make sure that the specific needs of young Black men, young Black women and older within the system are being supported tells me that not enough has changed. Some things have changed, but this overrepresentation, this lack of a willingness to understand, as Tax was saying earlier on, the culture and what that means to individuals and why that might mean they're acting in a slightly different way. They might be very expressive in the way they say things. And so often that's seen as being aggressive, when actually that's just part of a storytelling culture where everybody's talking. You know, if all of my siblings were together, all of my family and the wider extended family, it can get very confusing if you're not from that group because everybody's talking to this person. But we all know exactly what's happening. We can hear everybody because that's something that we've experienced over years. But it isn't necessarily something that's picked up on or provided for or supported in terms of making sure that people's culture, their background, their needs is actually taken on board. And I think that's a shame that it hasn't changed as much as it could have done. We could have done some really radical things within mental health services, particularly for those who were Black and, minority ethnic. I'll hand over to Taps.
Yeah, I'm chuckling because I'm just thinking to myself, even people from West Africa are very different from people from Southern Africa, for example, where I'm from. So West African people from Nigeria and Ghana and places like this, are far more expressive than people from Southern Africa. So I've got friends from Ghana, friends from Nigeria. When they're talking, it's almost like they're shouting at each other. Yeah. And so you'd be fooled to think that actually there's a fight that's just about to break out. But actually, that's just the way that they are. That's the way that they are. And actually, there's value behind that in terms of how those people express themselves and how passionate they are in their exchanges. There's value in understanding what drives that and what's behind that in terms from a culture sort of perspective. Those people are very different from people from Southern Africa. So even Africa is not a homogeneous. It's not a homogeneous continent. There's so many different countries, so many different cultures even within that. So I think it goes back to the need for us to appreciate the various cultures. So if people are being admitted onto mental health units, a Black African it's not a homogeneous reference. There's so many different nuances to being a Black African. There's so many different cultures. So it's important, again, to take stock of the individual and really understand where they're coming from, why they have those. And we've been talking to those modes of expression. We've been talking a lot in my line of work about cultural competence and cultural sensitivity. But much more recently, I've been thinking a lot about cultural humility over cultural competence and cultural sensitivity. Before we get to cultural sensitivity, before we get to cultural competence, let us demonstrate some humility in our ability to listen and to learn from other people and appreciate who they are. Because when we demonstrate that cultural humility, you might not even need to think about cultural competence, because you would just immediately become cultural competent from the fact that I actually listened to the person, and you've got to understand it, you've come to understanding the person. So I think if anything, I think in mental health services and in physical health services, what we need to focus on is cultural humility. Cultural humility is really the thing that we need to take forward.
I just wanted to quickly mention as well, it's something that a contact of mine had been involved in, which was around Black women and maternity health, maternal health. And that's a really, really big issue. And 1 in 4 Black women experience real problems in giving birth within this country, many leading to, high levels of stillborn babies, complications with mothers, higher rates in terms of women either becoming very, very ill or even losing their lives whilst giving birth. And that's something that is getting much more traction now, but that is an ongoing issue. There's almost this, many, many years ago, there was this almost a belief, and I don't know whether it's anecdotal, but there was a belief that, the pain threshold was higher for Black women, so therefore they can stand it. So they might be screaming and shouting, no, the baby's fine, the baby's fine. And that's something that we need to look at much more closely. I know as part of Black History Month, there was an event called Black Health Actually Matters. And that's something that we really do need to continue to look at in healthcare, because the levels are high and it's not great. And just thinking about the pandemic and COVID and the overrepresentation of Black and minority ethnic individuals, and not necessarily because of a predisposition to it, but very much so because often they are the frontline workers. They were the transport workers, particularly in London, being exposed right at the very beginning. Remember, masks were, we wear a mask, don't wear a mask. So they were being exposed to these in lower level posts. They were care workers, they were in care homes, they were doing home visits. They were doing some of these roles that would expose them much more than some of their other counterparts. And also because they were in some of these lower paid jobs, not able then to be working from home, as many of us have been doing for nearly 2 years now. So there's a number of challenges that are still there within physical and mental health. And these are things that can't really be swept under the carpet. Sickle cell anemia is a huge thing. This is still not given, the right level of attention that's required. And a number of people are still suffering really, really badly with sickle cell anemia. And it disproportionately impacts on people from the African Caribbean, Southeast Asian and Greek Cypriot, but predominantly there's a huge number of people who are impacted by that from the African Caribbean community. So there are a number of things that we are still not being able to see a real change in, and that's something that I hope by recording these things and actually being part of this and people, listening and hearing that things will start to change much more rapidly as well, rather than over generations. It would be great to see change in those things much more quickly.
Just going back to mental health though, I just wanted to give the stats so people can be as alarmed as I am. So people with severe mental illness across the Black country where I work are dying 15 to 18 years before the general population. So the mortality is 15 to 18 years earlier than the general population, and these people are dying from physical health conditions. So that's quite stark. You know, so 15 to 18 years, right, is the difference here.
Yeah.
So when we talk about parity of esteem, it is absolutely urgent that we actually start to look at physical and mental health together, and that we offer those two elements of service the same importance and the same resource in terms of how we're treating people and working within those spaces, because of the stats.
Yeah, no, it's so important. I think what you're saying many things that are so often not said, right? So mental health always there, and I think both of you really put the finger on the problem with history. You know, in the end, you know, we're historians and we're thinking about history, and I think you really put your finger where it aches, which is on one hand the absence of entire fields of studies, of entire, you know, system of voices. You know, history remains you know, a very white field and a very male field. And we are hoping that by introducing topics that actually can resonate with people from all different provenances in terms of ethnicity, in terms of walk of life, and so on, then also the history demographic changes, because then you have more and more history students that then later on become, you know, academics, or they work in museums, or they work in 1,000 other different places where they can. And then make this part of the larger story. So that's one big thing I think that you highlighted. And the other one is that issue of complexity, right? Because it's very normal for history programs to have, you know, the French specialist and the Italian specialist and the German specialist, and then if you're lucky, you get the Africanist in a vast continent, you know, with how many different, you know,
Exactly.
Again, intersecting paths. And the very adjective black that, you know, we ourselves put in front of black healthcare or black experience, we know, however, is filled with problems, right? Because in the end, you know, there is no one black experiences. There are how many people that, you know, then, you know, first of all, understand blackness in different ways, and then, you know, come from all different paths within it. So I do hope that, you know, this can be the drop in the ocean. But I'm itching to ask a beautiful question that came up in the comments. Someone asked about what is they made us most curious about this, and you know, she then explained. Rubery explained this was really a question meant for the interviewers, but I would like to expand it to all of us. You know, I'm happy to start by giving it a short answer for myself. What is that made me most curious? What is that surprised me from doing the interviews? But I would like to ask you, what is that surprised you about hearing one another, about the questions you were asked or not asked, and the way in which these kind of things are approached, even now, by historians who are trying to open up these discussions? I can say briefly for myself. I'll keep it really short. I think one thing certainly is the importance of faith for many people who we talk to or we read into. This seems to be a threat that comes up a lot. You know, that at one point, you know, religious practice or religious belief and faith, regardless of the religion, it seemed to be a big part of the story. And the other one, I think, well, I'm a historian of emotions, so I guess I'm biased. I tend to look for those things, but I think the presence of many emotions that are taboo. You know, another comment said, you know, thank you for coming forward. When we think about healthcare or the NHS, you know, we tend to think about pride and all the pretty and easy to talk about emotions. I think it's seldom that we hear about things like loneliness and frustration and humiliation, and, you know, other kind of emotions that, however, are very much at the center, and they don't demean the history of that place. They're part of it, and they should be discussed and they should be wrestled with, like any good historian in society would. So that's my two. But I would like to hear from Dr. Sadler, and especially then from Jennifer and Taps, and any comment that anyone else would like to put in whatever way you want, depending on how you're following, please. Oh, I think Dr. Sadler, you're muted.
I'm sorry, just while Jennifer and Taps.
2021.
How many times have we been caught up by that? Just while Jennifer and Taps reflect on that question, I think what surprised me about my interview with Danielle Oom was that she, well, when I say surprised, I think this is surprised in a bad way. was that she had experienced the very jagged edge of racism growing up in Birmingham in the 1960s and 70s. And she felt that in recent times, we had gone back to that phase, that same period again. And I think, I mean, she has a very broad understanding of these views. So it wasn't just, for example, the explosion of racism that we saw after the Euros in the summer with the footballers that missed. It was my sense anyway of her response to the issue was that she meant that in a broader way. So I think what was surprising and disappointing, I suppose, was that she had seen changes over the years, but that she felt, as a society, that Britain was Britain had gone back again to that to a very bad spot. There we go. That's not necessarily a reassuring thing to have taken away from these interviews, but it's an important one, and it's a valuable, I think, now other people may of course have different perspectives on that situation, so I'd be very interested to hear what Jennifer and Taps would have to say to that too.
And Daniel, by the way, was also, I think, very provocative in talking about things like Black History Month, which we're self-celebrate and try to build upon, but that can become very much a very easy way to just say, okay, now we got our bit, and then we can rest the rest of the year. And
she was concerned it was tokenistic. And the very fact that it was needed was proof of how deep the problems actually run.
But certainly was a very deep interview to listen to. Perhaps would you like to start this time?
Yeah.
Start with Jennifer this time. Shall we start with you?
That's not a problem at all. So I think we're in a unique moment in terms of race relations and social injustice in its widest sense. I think society more generally now is quite conscious of those imbalances that have historically plagued us as a society, and I think society is leaning far more towards actually it's not acceptable. We've seen that through the kind of Black Lives Matter movement. We've seen that during the whole pandemic experience, actually, and the vaccination drive. And I think we're in that moment where society generally wants or is yearning for a much more equitable sort of state of play. But then we have the Sadler report that started to undermine that general sentiment that was there across our society. And I think in that sense, there was a rolling back and a killing of the momentum that was starting to build in terms of working towards equity and a more equitable society. So Sadler's report was not helpful, and it was not, I don't feel like it was accurate. This is my own view. It was not an accurate representation of the issues that are there within our society, even still now. But we have to see this as a window of opportunity still, that society in general is refusing to continue on with kind of racism and prejudice and social injustice in any form. And so how do we leverage this as an opportunity and continue to build on it? I think there are systems and frameworks that we need to put in place to ensure that the checks and balances are there to continue to move us forward into a much more equitable kind of future. So the systems and the frameworks are about how we deliver healthcare, for example. It's about representation of our diversity, even within leadership in healthcare systems. So I'm very lucky. The organization I work in, our senior leadership structure is actually quite diverse, but that's not the same across the rest of the organizations within our system and beyond. So I think there is a challenge there for our healthcare systems to be much more representative of the diversity of the communities which we are serving. Across the Black country, 35% of our population are from ethnic minority sort of backgrounds and population. And so that needs to be reflected within the organizations which we serve, actually. And for me, those are structural changes that we need to put in place. Yeah. And then there's something about the values that we hold as organizations going forward. Those values have got to also be about, killing prejudice in any shape or form in which it might manifest, and giving people that, I suppose it's that permission and that support to challenge racism where it crops up within organizations. And so I think we've got this window of opportunity. We've got to utilize it by putting those systems and the processes and the forums and the infrastructure in place to continue this movement, because I think we are in that special moment where we're about to see some demonstrable change in terms of how our society works.
Now, perhaps if I may, would like to say a bit though about the issue of curiosity. What is the you personally, right, found striking, about what you heard, from Jennifer or from the other clip that you saw, or from the way in which we approach the project, right? The kind of questions that the students and we asked you. Anything that struck you, is either present or missing?
I think the role and the place of religious leaders is actually missing in the discourse, the general discourse around our society and our culture, our community's work. So during COVID, for example, we've almost rediscovered the importance of these community assets, as I like to call them. And we've gone out to religious and faith leaders, and we've said, well, help us to get people vaccinated, because we've realized the reach of these community leaders within our communities. So I think we need to perpetuate that in terms of how we work as a society going forward. We need to recenter our communities back on the importance of faith, the importance of faith. So if you look at the foundations of our country, this country, Christianity is absolutely central to the history of this country, of this nation, and how Christianity has played a role in developing that agency and the strength and the resilience of communities, agency for action in terms of how societies need to progress. So I think there's something there about recentering everything again, and actually bringing back the place and the importance of religion in our society, because we've recognized that the reach our community leaders, faith leaders have within communities, it cannot be understated going forward.
Jennifer.
Wow. First of all, in terms of the questions, and actually this start of this process has been excellent, and I think it's a really good starting point. And one of the things I remember saying to yourself, Ilaria, is about how we let our communities know about this type of program and tapping into those spaces where they are, whether that's on the radio stations that they listen to, whether it's the places that they might visit, whether it's, as Taps had said, the faith and community organisations that they're involved in. I think that's critical. So I'm really glad, and I feel, privileged to be part of it. And I think there's an ongoing, continuing conversation about this. I think this, as I say, is the starting point. A couple of things in response to Dr. Sadler's question about some of the things that Daniel was saying, and it is stark and it is surprising when you hear that. And whilst I never experienced that growing up, I was born in 71. It's not to say I didn't experience racism. I think what I've found is over the years that there are significant milestones in history that changes the way society behaves towards one another. One of those more recent is Brexit. What I found is literally the day after Brexit, I had staff members fearful about travelling on the bus. I had them fearful about walking down the street. We would double up some of the people going, make sure you travel together, purely on the basis that overnight, people then began basically telling them to go back home. We've voted to come out, so you're not welcome, etc., etc. And that it just emboldened what was already there. And that's the reality. It's always been there. It's just that with the voting, we're coming out of Brexit. We are, going back to Great Britain as it was. That seemed to embolden a lot of people in terms of the things they would say to people, which prior to that were not being said so openly. So I think that's something that struck me and sticks with me. One of the other things is about Black professionals overall. A lot of Black professionals, like myself, probably with us, we're tired, we are exhausted. And often, a bit like what Danielle was saying, you are often doing much, much more, and your pay is not reflecting that. And there's two things that need to happen there. The professional needs to say, actually, no, you need to pay me what I'm worth and pay me my value. But also for those employers, there's something about recognizing their skills and experience, regardless of the color of the skin or the gender, because that's also an issue that comes up as well, of the gender of the individual. So I think there's something about making sure that our systems are fair, that we're not putting in barriers to entry to senior roles that don't need to be there, and that you are recognizing the overall experience of individuals along with their qualifications as they're working their way through the different scales within an organization or in different roles. And I just think there's something about how we continue to challenge stereotypes and people's perceptions about Black men or Black women. And before people hold on to those stereotypes, ask a question. And, I know Black History Month can be seen as tokenistic because it's October. We've done that. We've done, our little bits. But what we challenged our staff to do at Health Exchange was across the whole business, everybody was asked, well, who is a Black individual that has inspired you? And we had things that came out were, a football coach for our marketing lead, but also, people like Nelson Mandela, they found very inspiring. And across the business, people are starting to share their stories of Black people, whether they are Black themselves or not, because often the question gets asked of the Black members of staff, who inspired you? When actually it's across the board. And for some of the Black individuals, they said, well, the most inspiring person may not have been a Black person. And for one member of staff, it was Margaret Thatcher, like her or loathe her. It was actually that individual who inspired her because they were a strong woman who, against all odds, had gone into a male-dominated arena and held her own. And so there is something about that, not seeing the homogeneity. People are so different and nuanced, and I just think there's a recognition of all of that that's required, along with all of the institutional infrastructure that is needed to make sure that it's fair. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, I just really want young people to not feel, particularly young Black men and women, that they feel they've still, in 2021, got to try twice as hard, do twice as much in order to get the same as their peers who may be doing significantly less. That's something that shouldn't be going on. And I still see it, and it's still happening.
And hopefully talking about the history can help to then, frame this and hopefully, change it for the better.
Yeah.
It is exactly as it happened whenever we did our interview. At one point we had to look at the clock, and it's always so painful. Realize how quickly moves whenever conversations disengaging take place. And I'm afraid we're at the moment of things. And I want to start actually with the medical school. in this case. Before, of course, then, coming to the people like yourself that are actually here and actually gave themselves to us. But I want to really thank the medical school for being very bold and in many ways challenging now the common wisdom that who needs the humanities. Really, we got to think about the hospital and the nurses and say and who needs the historians. And instead they say, no, we do need the historians. We want to hear the stories and the histories, and partner with us so enthusiastically and truly made us feel valued. And then together we've been able then to be a vehicle to bring our voices about history that are yours and your parents, are people below, people before that, people that are often not represented, like you mentioned, anything from the porters to the cleaners to how many others. At the very least, we can say we need them, and we can seek out now those historical narratives. And I think it's fantastic that we see a partnership of that kind. Certainly, history was very rejoicing in our students here. I do want to thank the students very much because they were truly engaged and just so enthusiastic. We put out a call for volunteers. We were overwhelmed, and they worked so hard. And if we have the names coming up again, there they are in the crawl. I really want to, applaud them in every way possible because they did a lot of work to make this happen during the interviews. They transcribed them, they catalog, they pick the clips and so on. And so I really want to applaud them. As I want to thank, of course, all the people who made the technology end of things. And I mentioned a few of them before, Sam Cook, Jim Locke, Lucy Drake, so kindly, cutting down clips so we could play them artfully here. And most, above everyone, our interviewees, you just gave a piece of yourself for, eternity to look at in the form of a video. But I think for all of us to just, again, come to know and you just model for sharing. Yes. And so really, really thank you. Also to Daniel, who's not with us today, but you saw in the clip. So the historic first 3 of the pilot, and may many, many, many more come. Dr. Sadler, of course, partner in crime in so many of our initiatives. Please follow Aston History. You see the Twitter handle. It's been present at the below. Any of us, always happy to talk to you. And please talk to young students, young people. We want to see more historians with different stories, different colors of skin, different gender, different paths, different everything. And we are the place for that. So as one of the most diverse programs in the UK, we like to champion that and continue. So please send them our way for a chat, for encouragement. And again, once just thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for watching and for the wonderful comments in the chat. The video will be available on YouTube for more to see. Dr. Sadler, closing word.
Ilaria, we've just overlooked one person, and that is Dr. Alexis Payton, who helped us in particular with the ethical approval process, which is an important feature of the research as well. And let me just add my thanks to the thanks of Dr. Scalia for your taking part this evening, and then to everyone who has watched this broadcast or who will watch it in the future.
Thanks again, and good evening, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for logging in.
Thank you.